And we're live.
Hello and welcome to the PFF Live Q&A. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Ari, how are you doing on this wonderful Monday afternoon?
I'm doing really well. We have a late start here today because it looks like everything that is notable is down, from Facebook, Instagram to WhatsApp to our streaming thing that we use. But here we are. It's 2 o'clock on the East Coast, and we're back after a crazy week 4, a great Sunday night game of Tom Brady coming back to New England. And we have a really good game coming up tonight. So we're really excited for that as well.
Brad, how are you doing today?
Yeah, if we went off at our scheduled time, I wouldn't have seen Matt Nagy say that Andy Dalton was still the starter when healthy, so maybe I would have been in better spirits. But no, I'm still riding high. Fields look great on Sunday. Can't take that away from us. Feeling good on a rainy Monday.
I'm pretty tired. I was at last night's Patriots-Buccaneers game, but great game between the Buccaneers and Patriots. I personally thought lived up to the hype. Maybe we would preferred, something a little bit more exciting there at the end rather than a doinked 56-yard field goal, but we can get into that kind of stuff now. And let's start off the conversation by talking about rookie quarterbacks, because I thought Mac Jones once again looked pretty good on Sunday night. Wasn't incredible, didn't light the world on fire or anything like that, but I thought he definitely held his own against Tom Brady, which certainly is not an easy thing to do. Just kind of going through his PFF stats from Sunday night. Time to throw was only 2.3 seconds. That was second fastest of all quarterbacks in week 4. Only 6.1 yards depth of target. That was last among starting quarterbacks in week 4. He did have one interception that came while he was hit while throwing. But one other stat, 12.5% uncatchable inaccurate rate. So that's the passes that are so inaccurate that they're uncatchable. 12.5%. That was the 5th lowest among starting quarterbacks in week 4. So that kind of gives you a good feeling of how Mac Jones played. Wasn't taking many risks, but he was accurate. For the most part, he was avoiding mistakes. And like I said, that one interception did come while he was hit while throwing the ball, which isn't always a quarterback's fault. He might have been better to live for another day and take the sack on that. But he was also getting hit pretty hard by the Buccaneers defense all Sunday night. I was impressed basically every time that he peeled his body off the Gillette Stadium turf, because some of those hits were extremely hard. But let's get into some of the other quarterbacks. We'll talk about the 49ers situation in a little bit, but Ari, what did you see from Zach Wilson on Sunday, Jets rookie quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Jets fans have been waiting for this for a while. The Zach Wilson we saw yesterday was the Zach Wilson we were all hoping to see, or at least Jets fans were hoping to see when they drafted him number 2 overall. Things just started to click yesterday. Like, up until now, it was such a mess. The protection yesterday held up. The Jets allowed, I believe it was an average of 5 sacks a game the first 3 weeks of the season. They allowed just 1 yesterday against the Titans. And for the first time all year, Wilson had time to sit back, do his thing, and throw the ball. And this morning, I put together a clip of some of his big throws from yesterday's game on my Twitter page, and there were some gorgeous throws in there. A few of these, rookie quarterbacks got it going here in week 4, and Wilson was definitely one of them. And if you look at their upcoming schedule, they have the Atlanta Falcons this week in London, so that's a very winnable game there for the Jets as well. They could be looking at 2-3 going into their bye week. So a potential quick turnaround for a team that started off so bad, only scored 20 points total in their first 3 games. This week they upset the Titans, and they could be looking at another win here this week. And Zach Wilson finally looks comfortable in that offense. So a big time turnaround there for them. First 3 weeks they had a few tough defenses that they had to face, but here we go. He's easing in there, and he looked really, really good there yesterday.
Yeah, Wilson looked a lot better. Trevor Lawrence on Thursday night looked a lot better. Another guy that Brad mentioned earlier, Justin Fields looked quite a bit better on Sunday as well. Matt Nagy still said, the Bears head coach, that they're going to start Andy Dalton when he's healthy. And Brad, I'm assuming that makes you a very happy camper, correct?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You talk about Zach Wilson, who led the NFL this week with the total amount of passing yards coming on throws, 20-plus yards downfield. He had 165 passing yards from those deep throws. Number 2 was Justin Fields. 151 passing yards on throws, 20-plus yards downfield. He had 4 of our PFF big-time throws. Andy Dalton had 1 on the season so far. Fields' rate of big-time throws, 4 out of his 17 passing attempts, is the highest rate in Bears history in the PFF era since 2006. So, all of that, you take all of that, and of course, it makes sense to then go ahead and start Andy Dalton next week at Las Vegas. I think it's funny when people had the conversations about Justin Fields and about this Bears offensive line that is not good. We're now saying the Raiders, you can't play against the Raiders because of a good start from Yannick Ngakoue and Max Crosby. I mean, give me a break. Like, if that defensive line means you should bench your first-round pick quarterback, then just put the guy in bubble wrap and never play him. I mean, that's crazy to me. So we'll see what happens. I think it might be a little bit of gamesmanship. I think it's going to be hard to keep Fields off the field. Outside of big plays and all that, he just looked much more calm and comfortable in structure. Yes, the Lions' pass rush is not the Browns, but I think the game already did slow down for him after 1 week. Getting his hot routes out, stuff like that. I will say still took 3.12 seconds on average time to throw, which is too long. But a little bit of that does come from the play action they ran, about 36% play action this week. So anyways, long story short, Fields trending up. And I think a lot of these rookie quarterbacks are starting to trend in the right direction.
And those mobile quarterbacks always kind of typically have a longer time to throw anyway. I was kind of digging into that data quite a bit before we came on. And the one quarterback who always stands out, who's not really a mobile quarterback, who still does have a high time to throw, is Jacoby Brissett, who you don't want to see it from a guy like Jacoby Brissett. It's a little bit better when it's a guy like Justin Fields. But let's get in the 49ers quarterback situation before we move on. And Jimmy Garoppolo said on Sunday that he anticipates that he'll be out a couple of weeks with a calf injury. He said that it was kind of a calf injury that he's dealt with in the past. He's hoping that's not anything bigger, like an Achilles or anything like that. But in the meantime, Trey Lance will be the 49ers quarterback. And I'd say that there was some up and down moments from Trey Lance on Sunday. Head coach Kyle Shanahan even said, this is why he's the number 2 quarterback, because, that's why he's the backup. But at the same time, Jimmy Garoppolo hasn't exactly been lighting the world on fire either. He started out the season pretty hot, but I could see a situation here where, if Trey Lance does play well over these next couple of weeks, he could wind up winning and keeping that starting quarterback job. It really just all depends on how Trey Lance performs over this time when Jimmy Garoppolo's out. But Ari, what are you thinking about, the Trey Lance era starting a little bit earlier than people expected in San Francisco?
Yeah, it's definitely starting earlier than what the 49ers actually hoped for. I know their fans wanted him out there earlier, but I want to just backtrack for a second, because what I found interesting about all of this is Garoppolo announced the injury on his own. And I'm not sure if Kyle Shanahan likes him doing that, because we know how protective they are about all this. They're very close to the vest when it comes to information. And I could definitely see a scenario where Kyle would have wanted to stretch this thing out during the week like he did throughout training camp. And instead, Jimmy came out and said he's going to miss some time. And that, as you said, opens the door for Trey Lance. And the question really becomes now if that was the last time we saw Jimmy as the starter. If you remember back in the draft process, Kyle Shanahan said the biggest issue of Jimmy is not the play, it's the injuries. And this is exactly what he meant. And if you watch Jimmy's post-game press conference, you can see the frustration in his eyes. So now here in week 5, Trey will become the 6th rookie quarterback to get a start, and is in line to do so versus the undefeated Arizona Cardinals. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about them as well here later on.
Yeah, huge NFC West matchup there. I think it's notable, too, that Trent Williams, their left tackle, best tackle in football, arguably, also left the game with a shoulder issue. And our injury expert, Mario Pilato, says that generally, if you can't return with a shoulder issue, that's probably a bit of a red flag. It's not a great sign. So he might miss some time as well. And I do think that I caught a good amount of that game. I think Lance, understandably, was not super fast processing. I mean, look, he has 1 year of college football, not at the D1 level. But I will say what he can do that Garoppolo doesn't offer you is he had a couple scrambles. One of them, I want to say, was on 4th down, maybe 4th and 8 late in the football game. Took off with his legs and is dynamic in the open field. I mean, makes guys miss, can really manipulate space and kind of goad guys into trying to, set the edge or do certain things. And he just, cuts the other way. And that's just not there with Jimmy. So I think that could be interesting if he keeps his job for a couple of weeks and the passing game, comes along with him. But, if Williams is not there, it could be beneficial to have a quarterback that can bail out of the pocket, if their left tackle, their backup left tackle gets beat because their starting backup, I guess not a thing, but their original backup got hurt before the season. So they're on their 3rd left tackle. So that could be, an interesting wrinkle there.
Definitely. Let's get into some other injuries of the week. Another quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, left Sunday's game with a concussion. Obviously, very tough to predict whether we'll actually see him on Sunday, this upcoming Sunday. But I'd say that overall, the quarterback situation in Denver is not great while they have a lot of those injuries with their offensive skill position players. KJ Hamler not going to be coming back this season. Jerry Jeudy out for a while with that high ankle sprain. But I think that this is the week that we really start to see those injuries become an issue at quarterback, because even before Teddy Bridgewater left that game, he was not great on Sunday. Only had a 40% accuracy rate per our data, 9.7 average depth of target, which is pretty high. Was getting rid of the ball in 2.4 seconds. But overall, just kind of a shaky performance from Teddy Bridgewater before he left the game. And Drew Lock really wasn't any better. He did have one big time throw, but also had a turnover worthy play. Pretty similar on accuracy rate, was getting rid of the ball a little bit slower than Teddy Bridgewater. So just not a good situation there in general with their passing attack. But this does put, a little bit more of an impetus on a guy like Noah Fant to step up, on Tim Patrick, on Cortland Sutton. But it could just be kind of a slow go for the Denver offense until they actually get Jerry Jeudy back on the field. Brad, what was one of the key injuries that you were watching this weekend?
Yeah, so all that good news about Chicago, but it definitely a huge loss with running back David Montgomery. Has been a dynamic player, has looked different this year, a lot faster, a lot more burst. Already had 2 touchdowns on the day in this game, including one on about a 9-yard run where he pushed an entire pile of guys, and that's what we've become used to seeing out of David Montgomery. He's very important in this offense as well, because Damian Williams is a capable backup, but he also had a bit of a thigh injury on Sunday, so we'll monitor that. And Tariq Cohen is still not back and healthy, dealing with an ACL tear from last season. So not the longest, not the deepest position group for Chicago. And it will be interesting to see who handles those duties without him, because he was getting the lion's share of snaps, targets, touches, all of that. He is I know it's so rare now to see a true number one workhorse running back, but he was one of the few in the league this year.
Yeah, Ari, what was an injury that you were monitoring over the weekend?
Yeah, and I guess I'll just stick in the NFC North. An injury that was probably a little bit more severe than Montgomery's. Romeo Okwara, the Detroit Lions pass rusher, arguably their most irreplaceable defensive player. He's done for the year with the torn Achilles. It's actually the same injury that Jeff Okudah had earlier in the year. I believe it was in week 1. Okwara isn't really a household name, but he had a career high 10 sacks last year, and with a new regime coming in with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, they decided to re-sign him this offseason on a pretty big 3-year, $39 million deal. And now he's out for the year with a torn Achilles, which obviously is a really rough injury that's going to take some time to come back from. So he's now out. What's interesting is now his brother, Julian Okwara, is likely going to end up seeing more snaps. But this is a team that has just been hammered with injuries. From Okwara and Okudah, like I mentioned, to Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow on the offensive line. Trey Flowers has missed the last couple of games. So they've been able to crawl back into most of these games they've played in this year. But with so many injuries to their key players, it's going to be a pretty long year there in Detroit.
Definitely. And then some other injuries just to monitor over the weekend. Washington tight end Logan Thomas dealing with a hamstring injury. Brandon Scherf, one of their guards, also dealing with an injury that could keep those guys out a few weeks. And then Jedrick Wills, Browns offensive tackle. It seems like it's kind of a lingering ankle injury for Wills, but haven't heard anything too severe on that front at this point. Let's get into some important wins over the weekend as well. Some teams who desperately needed wins. And I'll kick that off with the New York Giants. I think that that was probably the most meaningful win of the weekend just for me, because with Dave Gettleman, who knows how long of a rope he's got in New York, probably not very long at this point. Joe Judge, there's just been a lot of I don't even know how to put it, but just like between the retirements this summer, between the slow start that they got out to, it just hasn't exactly been the most positive start to the season for the Giants. So for them to come out of yesterday, with a victory, and especially one where Daniel Jones looked really good against a pretty decent New Orleans Saints team. The Saints are definitely not bottom feeders in the NFL. They're 2-2 on the season. It's been a little bit touch and go for the Saints early on, but this isn't like they were beating another 0-3 team. This was a pretty impressive win over a team that's pretty good in another really high energy atmosphere with the Saints returning to the Superdome. And I'd say that all off season, I thought that an underreported or under talked about storyline was just the performance of Daniel Jones this season. And you'd think a guy like Daniel Jones playing in, the biggest market in the United States would be under a little bit of a bigger spotlight, but I'd say that over the summer, he really wasn't. I think that expectations were just so low for Daniel Jones and for the Giants that no one was even really talking about how he would perform this season. But first career 400-yard game, he graded well in our stats, and I also thought it was really positive that they got a good performance out of Kenny Golladay. Kadarius Toney was showing something as that first-round pick. And then John Ross coming off injured reserve and making big plays for the New York Giants. I don't think that expectations were very high for John Ross as well this season, but it really just did seem like the offense clicked much better overall in that game against the Saints. And like I said, it's been a little bit touch and go for the Saints, but they had most of their defensive players, defensive starters back in that game. So definitely positive to have Daniel Jones have one of really the best performances, I'd say, of his career in that game against the Saints. Ari, what win was most meaningful for you on Sunday or this week?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with another team that came in winless, and that is the Indianapolis Colts. And not only did they win on Sunday, but they were the only team in the AFC South to win on Sunday. And that just makes it even more, better for them. They started the year 0-3. The Titans were, they lost the Titans last week, but now they're right back in it with that win over Miami. We've talked about all these injuries around the NFL of San Francisco and Baltimore, but the Colts have been hammered with injuries as well. Quentin Nelson and T.Y. Hilton, Braden Smith, Kwity Paye, and on and on. The fact that Carson Wentz has played 100% of the snaps is actually incredible considering everything he's dealt with. But yesterday, for the first time all year, the offense ran through Jonathan Taylor, who had over 100 yards for the first time all year. The defense, they weren't great, but they did just enough to stop Jacoby Brissett. That game was just progress after a rough first 3 games. There's still a lot to clean up. And, here's the thing. They're not going to face Jacoby Brissett every week. So, they have Lamar Jackson here next week on Monday Night Football. And, just a reminder, they're going to have Hard Knocks cameras over here following them along here very soon. So yesterday was progress. And this is a team that I still believe could turn it around and make a run at the AFC South. But they need to get healthier first. But they took a pretty big step forward on Sunday. And I'm sure there's a big relief inside that building over there.
Yeah, Brad, what was the most meaningful win for you this weekend?
Yeah, I think the New York Jets was the biggest win of the weekend for me. Ari, I think it's a great point that they're headed to London now. Play Atlanta, could maybe be 2-3 into their bye, and 2 wins sounds like nothing, but that would tie their total from last season. So that I'm sure they'd be excited about that. But I also think it's really just this defense. I think we've heard for years how the defense is good and the offense is just historically bad, and there's some question marks of is the defense really good or a team's kind of taking their foot off the gas late in games, stuff like that. And I think we saw against the Titans were missing A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, but nevertheless, a good team, a playoff team, a good offense. They held their own throughout that entire game, and I think we made a big deal, as we should have, the Jets having no secondary, cutting all these cornerbacks before the season starts. Bryce Hall is a good player. It looks like a good young cornerback. I think you got to trust that Robert Saleh knows what he's doing with that defense and will figure things out. But look, they lose Carl Lawson, their best edge rusher before the season. All these things happen, but they are deep and talented up front, and I think the back end will come along with more and more time. And I think it was a legitimate win. I think it was a big win that kind of changes the mood and the vibe. They're not going to contend this season. They all know that. We all know that. But I think it does help coming off some tough performances through 3 weeks. Wilson plays good, defense plays good, and they get a big win over a legitimate opponent.
There's only 2 winless teams left, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Detroit Lions, and then only 2 undefeated teams as well, the Las Vegas Raiders, who play tonight on Monday Night Football against the Chargers, and the 4-0 Arizona Cardinals. So are the Cardinals legitimate Super Bowl contenders? They certainly looked like it on Sunday, beating the LA Rams 37-20. I was actually, like I said, I was at the game last night, the Patriots Bucks game in the press box. And I was actually watching that game with Aaron Schatz. So you had some PFF and Football Outsiders guys, to Sharon, Massachusetts alum, or Sharon High School alum, watching that game together. But we were both pretty shocked at the fact that the Arizona Cardinals had put up 37 points against LA Rams defense that, everyone had some very high expectations coming into the 2021 season, and they haven't exactly lived up to those at this point. So I do think that the Cardinals are legit, but I'm also just going to turn this conversation personally over the fact that it's a little bit concerning to see what the Rams defense has done so far this season. And you do point to the fact that they lost Brandon Staley. He's now the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, I should say. They brought in Raheem Morris, who didn't really have, a great knowledge of the defense that the Rams wanted to run there. And they just expected everything to essentially carry over from what Brandon Staley was running to what Raheem Morris now will be running for them. And it does seem like there might be some growing pains there with the Rams. We'll see. It's only 4 weeks into the season. They can certainly still turn things around there. But I'd personally say that I'm a little bit concerned about the Rams defense, just about whether or not they can pull that together. But Brad, how legit do you think the Cardinals are this season?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they were first in expected points added per play allowed last year were the Rams. They're currently 25th in the NFL. Yes, they played some good teams, but obviously that is, a concerning split there. The Cardinals are legit. I wanted to question this team and wanted to poke holes in their roster since before the season even started, and I frankly can no longer do that. I think first, to make a big trade for Rodney Hudson at center. And we have a question in our comment section. Where was Aaron Donald? Great question. I mean, he went up against one of the best pass blocking centers per PFF, maybe the best pass blocking center we've ever seen. So that trade was great. I also think, AJ Green has more receiving yards than DeAndre Hopkins on this team. You have multiple running backs. I loved how they used Rondale Moore a bunch. What they did is they put him in the backfield, and if the play collapsed, Kyler was checking it down to him. There was a 3rd and 18 that he converted, made a bunch of guys miss in open space. So I think they had a decent roster, and all of their free agency movement, all of them, but a lot of these free agency moves that we've seen and the draft they had, they're all hitting early. They're clicking early, and I think it's unfair to not say they're legitimate. They blew the Rams out of the building in LA. I think they're a contender.
Yeah, I would agree with you all. And the only thing for me about the Cardinals is that this team started hot last year as well, and they weren't able to sustain it. And since they're in the NFC West, they really can't let go of the gas pedal. We knew the offense was going to be fun, and they've scored 30-plus points in each of their first 4 games this year. I believe they scored on 7 of their first 9 possessions yesterday. Murray committed 0 turnover-worthy plays per our data, and the Cardinals have proven that they can run up the score against anybody. So they did it yesterday against the Rams. For me, it's really just, can Kyler stay healthy? Something that didn't happen last year. And then the defense, which has really overachieved so far, can they keep that up? But I've loved seeing all these playmakers on offense that you guys just mentioned. It's not just DeAndre Hopkins like last year. We're getting AJ Green. We're getting Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk, Trace Edmonds, Max Williams, James Conner. All these guys are involved. So that's been cool to see. And it's been a fun offense so far, a fun team. They've really overperformed what most of us were expecting.
Absolutely. Let's finish it off here with a question from a guy that we know pretty well, George Chikuri. Who are the trade candidates you guys are watching most closely, both teams and players? I'll kick this off with a team that I covered for 8 years, the game that I covered last night. The Patriots can use a running back right now. James White out for the season. They're trying to use Brandon Bolden in that 3rd down role, and Brandon Bolden's essentially been a career special teams player, has never really taken on this big of a role on offense really since probably 2013, 2014. He might have missed a blitz pickup yesterday in the game. JJ Taylor fumbled. Ramondre Stevenson has fumbled in the past. So I think that they wanted to rely on those young running backs. That's not really coming together right now. So a guy that I think that would actually make a lot of sense for them to trade for is a guy that they know very well, and that's Rex Burkhead on the Houston Texans. The Texans have certainly been willing to trade players and deal all off season, all season, throughout the summer. There's a relationship there, obviously, with Nick Caserio, the former Patriots director of player personnel, as Houston's general manager. And Rex Burkhead is really barely playing right now in Houston. Like I said, the Patriots can use a pass catching back who can pick up blitzes out of the backfield. And that's what Rex Burkhead can do. They elected not to re-sign him this offseason because he was coming off the torn ACL, but he's healthy now. He's only played about 32 snaps, something like that for the Texans, but he has been on the field. The Texans also, I think, are like 5 running backs deep on their depth chart. You never really know who's going to get the ball in that backfield between Mark Ingram and Phillip Lindsay, and Scotty Phillips is involved in there, David Johnson. So they could certainly give up a running back, and the Patriots could use one. Not sure if anything gets done there, but it certainly seems like it would be a decent fit. Brad, are you watching any trade candidates right now?
Yeah. So something I like to do with trades, because it seems to bear out a lot this way, is that, teams in the same division or maybe in the same conference, if they have a similar need, it sometimes can push the process forward because the team might make a move just to kind of avoid another team making that move. Yeah. And I think we saw that in the NFC South already. All 3 teams have already made a big move at cornerback. We saw the Panthers trade for CJ Henderson. We saw the Saints go ahead and trade for Bradley Roby. And then we saw Richard Sherman sign with the Buccaneers. So now I'm going to look at the NFC West. You have the Seattle Seahawks, the 49ers, struggling on the back end there. I think, even Arizona, like we've talked about, could also make a move at cornerback. And so some of the names there, kind of just teams that are not good. And maybe at the deadline, they go ahead and make some moves. I think Xavier Rhodes, Indianapolis, would be very interesting. He's played a lot of zone in Indianapolis, but did play man coverage in Minnesota a bunch. So maybe has the ability to play both. With the Raiders, Damon Arnett, yes, he's a recent first-round pick, but not really playing much, not doing much for them. And like I mentioned, CJ Henderson already been traded. And then a couple other names, Vernon Hargreaves in Houston got benched this past week. Maybe gets moved to go play elsewhere. And a last one, if things go very south in Pittsburgh, maybe Joe Hayden. I thought he looked pretty good this past week against Green Bay. He wanted that new contract before the season began. Him in Pittsburgh couldn't work it out. But I think he still has some good play left in him, and maybe a team making a push views him as a guy that puts them over the top in the secondary for the playoffs. So I think a bunch of teams in the NFC, the Packers as well. Jair Alexander's coming off a game where he got hurt as well. So Rams, Seahawks, Cardinals, Packers, potential playoff teams, all could use a cornerback. I think that's the area to watch.
Yeah, and I would kind of agree with Brad. I mean, it's interesting because there's a few teams that are obvious, and I think you mentioned Rex Burkhead. I think really anybody on the Texans roster could be available right now. Like that so many veterans, so many guys on 1-year deals, that whole roster could basically be dealt. And the biggest name we'll be watching is obviously Deshaun Watson. We'll see if that heats up. Brad mentioned the Steelers. I mean, this is a team that is 1-3 and it's just been awful so far this year, and the rest of the division is 3-1. They don't have many draft picks coming up this year, and it's fair to wonder if the losing continues, if they look to blow it up a little bit and trade some of these guys like a Joe Hayden. You never know. Juju is on his 1 year left on his deal. Could he be dealt if they're sitting at 2-5 by November 2nd or whatever it is? So it's interesting to keep an eye on Pittsburgh, and then Detroit, Jacksonville, all these teams that are losing. I think all those teams could be looking just to make some trades, the guys who are in expiring contracts, and get some draft capital for next year. So I think those are some of the teams to keep an eye on for sure. And November 2nd, a Tuesday, is the trade deadline. So under a month.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The trade deadline is less than a month away, but that will do it for this week's PFF Live Q&A. I'm Doug Kyed. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. Follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad, and keep it on PFF for all of the betting data and all the analysis and everything for tonight's Monday Night Football. Check out the Green Line, follow the fantasy, everything over at PFF.com.